Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Southeast Radio.
Welcome back to Southeast Radio's Business Matters with me, Karl Fitzpatrick. My final guest this morning, Mark Little, is no stranger to the world of news, having carved out a successful career as a journalist, TV broadcaster and an entrepreneur in the industry. His latest venture, Kinzen, is bringing personalisation to daily news routines, and he joins me to discuss this business in more detail. Mark, our listeners will best remember you as RTE's first Washington correspondent and a host of Primetime, during which you were on hand for many historic and seismic news events. But when you reflect on this part of your career, what stories have stayed with you?
Well, it's funny. It's always the stories you remember that were about real people. So, I look back at my time in Washington and I covered President Clinton. I covered all kinds of international events. I covered even the Monica Lewinsky scandal, if people remember that far back. But what really always comes back to me is the meetings with real people. I mean, I'm thinking about, I was on death row in Texas talking to a man just about to be executed. And that was the most powerful sense I ever had of mortality, I have to say. And yet, at the same time, kind of joyous events as well, like covering the Oscars, getting to meet a few of those celebrities in the red carpet, and then obviously the pomp and circumstance of Washington itself and all the amazing characters that populate American politics. But I have to say, it really came down to the incredibly rich society that America is. It was always getting out into the places like Cuyahoga County, Ohio, that always intrigued me more than what was necessarily going on in the corridors of power in Washington.
Now, I'd like to get your thoughts on the Trump administration and especially in the way he's treating the media.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I always advise people right now to take a step back from the daily barrage of tweets and the bizarre goings-on in Washington and the Trump administration and look at the present time through the prism of a history book. So if you put yourself forward 20 years, what will we remember? And we'll probably forget a lot of the daily stuff that's going on, and we'll remember things that really mattered. I think Trump's assault on the media really matters. I think it's chilling to see the extent to which he has tried to make the free press the enemy of the people, in his own words. And so that definitely is something which I feel he's undermined, not just faith in the institutions of journalism, but he's also undermined faith in facts. And that's something I think that we remembered. But I have to say also that I think the media, to a large extent, has played into his own hands. So now you have the cable news networks breathlessly repeating every single thing he says on his Twitter feed. And the reason for that is they're making a lot of money out of Trump, the circus. And so I think there's a little bit of the media playing into the hands of Trump as he does some serious damage to American democracy.
Now, as we all know, Storyfall was a phenomenal success for you, culminating in its sale to Rupert Murdoch's News Corp for $18 million. How did this sale come about? And perhaps you can provide us with an insight into the negotiation process which took place as part of this deal.
So everything looks really simple and fantastic in retrospect, but that was an awful long period of my life. It lasted from, I suppose, about 8 months from the phone call I got from a friend of mine, an executive in the Wall Street Journal, who asked me, were we interested in investment from News Corp? And 8 months later, December, I think it was 21st, 2013, the company was sold. And, for people who look back and see that, they always just look at the exit, but there was an awful lot of difficulty. So, for example, there's an amazing amount of legal negotiations going on. I remember at one point getting a questionnaire that was probably 50 or 60 pages thick. Included questions about, the amount of private aircraft we owned and things like that. We could hardly afford to pay for light bulbs at that stage in the company's existence. So it all looks very glamorous when you see people walking out at the end with a big wad of cash. But in fact, there's a huge amount of drama. Even the last days before the sale, I remember 2 sets of lawyers, ours and theirs, holed up in a Dublin office block until 3-4 in the morning for days on end, arguing about minute points of law. So, yeah, it always seems very glamorous, but only in retrospect.
Now, Mark, following your stint at Twitter, you established Neva Labs, which has recently been renamed as Kinzen. What is the concept behind this business?
every great business, I think, starts with a problem. And in this case, the problem, I think, is going to be well known to all of your listeners. And that is every morning you get up these days and you're just under a barrage of constant information coming at you from every device, from every news feed, from every platform. And it's just really hard to find news that matters to you in your life. So we wanted to solve that problem by creating a mobile app experience that allows you to set the interest that you really care about in your daily life, whether it be your local transport network, your local football team, to the job you have, to being a parent, or to the passion you have for a particular sports club, and just get a digest of what you need to know every single day. And really one of the big problems we're also trying to overcome is that a lot of the news feeds you have in your life, from Facebook to any of the digital platforms, they're using a creepy form of technology that is always looking at your worst instincts. It's serving you up stuff that you may unconsciously browse on the internet in your web browsing, and it's not serving you up things that help you in your daily life. So we want to give people control back over the news and information experience they have, get them back to kind of routines that gave them some meaning in their everyday life. You know, they used to have a newspaper delivered in the morning. Well, we want to deliver them some digest of news and information that helps them feel they've got control of their life, give them a sense of agency over their life.
So it really cuts through the noise. Now, personalisation is the hot topic in business right now. So how are you using technology and data to provide a customised daily news routine for users?
So the first thing we're doing is, and this is really one area that I feel is very dangerous, right? Because a lot of the personalization techniques that are used by a lot of the social platforms and a lot of news aggregators and even some news publishers, they're trying to hook you on their content. They're trying to make you addicted and stay as long as possible on their websites because they need you to do that to pay their advertising bills. We're saying that's the wrong way of going about it. We found statistics and research that shows us that the experiences people are happiest with, they're the apps they spend only a few minutes with every day, but deliver them something of real value to them, that really understand them. So we've worked on a whole form of machine learning and artificial intelligence that understands your identity at any point in the day and also asks you to tell us what's useful to you, rather than tracking you in your browser history or trying to put trackers on your behavior on the internet. We're going to just track very, very simple pieces of data that reflect your intentions, what you want out of the news experience.
Now, we know that technology-based businesses are notoriously capital intensive, but I understand that you're using a crowdfunding strategy as a means of raising money for Kinzen.
So what we're doing is really looking at the idea of membership rather than subscriptions. So I think a lot of news organizations are pinning their hopes on having a paywall and people will just give them money and get content in return. What we found is there's a lot more people who are desiring some sort of relationship with a community. And so we're not crowdfunding just yet. We've just asked people to come in and help us test the app that we're building, also help us build out the sources that we're going to be using. And some have also given us some money. So essentially we're giving them 6 months free use of the app if they come register and pay some money now up front. We're being funded by other more traditional sources like private investors. We have a major investor in the US and also Enterprise Ireland is supporting the business. So we're very much a combination of sources of finance, but we're very focused on this idea that we're asking you to join a community more than simply just sign up to another news subscription. And we want people to become involved in making this experience better as we go forward.
So as you say, ahead of the official app launch in January, you have asked testers to trial the app. But specifically, what information are you looking to garner from this research?
So specifically, we're just looking for 3 things. One is, do we understand you? So we want to be able to test out our app's ability to identify very quickly the topics and locations that you're interested in. So for example, if you're commuting, let's say, from Wexford to Dublin every morning and you need to know exactly what the weather will be like, what the transport's like, what the traffic's like, we want to know that's important to you. But we also want to know that you're going to your job as an accountant, let's say, this morning. So we're going to feed you with information around your professional area of expertise. So we just want to know, are we doing this right? The second thing we want to do is give you control of your feedback. So we want you to be able to make the feeds that you're seeing more relevant and improve in time. So we want to have feedback from people if we're doing that right. And finally, are we giving you the ability to get routines that suit your life? So if you're cycling to work in the morning, we're going to be giving you a podcast instead of text services. So really, we're just trying to involve people in really helping co-develop the app to make sure that we're delivering on the promise that we're making.
Now, you mentioned the word subscriptions, but how exactly will the revenue generating model work for Kinzen?
So we feel there's a potential for several revenue models. The first is a basic membership fee for use of the app. The second area we're exploring is working with publishers so that you can actually access the Kinzen experience through your favorite publisher's website. And there we might revenue share around potentially a subscription product. We're also looking ahead and seeing how people who are active in the app may also start to charge for their own services, whether they be paid newsletters. So we feel like we're creating an ecosystem in which publishers can make money, we make money, and most of all, the individual users of the app feel that they're part of a community that's worth paying for on a monthly basis.
Now, news, of course, is a global commodity. So with that in mind, I would imagine that you have global ambitions for Kinzen. But what markets are you going to be targeting first?
The first markets we have to address are the English-speaking markets, because that's where a lot of the machine learning that we're implementing is obviously acquainted more with English language terms and entities. And so we're using the English-speaking world as the first test of concept. I have to say we're particularly interested in the United States, and not just the big cities like New York or Los Angeles. We're interested in looking at these big cities that have very diverse and young populations, because I think that's where we're seeing a lot of very interesting changing behaviors around news. So we're seeing that a lot of younger metropolitan Americans are starting to pay for news more than older people. And also they're much more collaborative. They want to get involved in whatever experience that they are consuming. So we think that there's parts of the U.S. particularly that give us a really good test bed for proving some of the concepts. And, as what happens with every big technology player that we've seen for the past 20 years, these things start sometimes with a small group of early adopters who have a specific incentive to spread the word among other groups. So, we're going to start small with a relatively small membership next year, but we're hoping that the right kind of members and people who essentially in some ways influence others. And a lot of the behaviors we're seeing in the U.S. are starting to spread to other parts of the world, particularly in relation to younger people who are now much more conditioned to pay for quality content because of Netflix and Spotify. And they're showing in huge numbers a move toward paying for quality content. And that's really good news for us, and I would say good news for journalism right across the board.
And Mark, is it your plan to build Kinzen to sell it?
No. From our point of view, we're building for distance, not for a speedy exit. That's not to say that we don't want to give a good return to our investors and at some point obviously pay back with dividends the people who've taken a risk in us. But I think for myself and the co-founders, Anya Kerr and Paul Watson, I want to be doing this for a long time. This is something that I want to see grow into a global force.
Now, the news industry has probably been one of the areas which has witnessed the greatest level of disruption over the last decade. But looking ahead, what, in your opinion, will be the future of news from a mainstream perspective?
So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see very strong survival and I think even prospering of a lot of traditional news sources that serve people's everyday needs. So I think, broadcasting and live television will still be a huge part of our lives. I think we're going to start to see, obviously, the end of the newspaper. But that may not be a bad thing necessarily in the long term, as long as we start seeing survival of journalism. My big prediction would be that we're going to start to see news organizations become very similar, serving multiple platforms, but most importantly, serving specific niches. So I think what's going to end up happening is you're going to see decentralization of news organizations. We won't necessarily have the big masthead publisher. We're going to have individual journalists serving specific communities. So it's never been easier now for a journalist, let's say, covering a specific sport, to set up on their own, to set up a newsletter, to set up a small newsroom and generate loyal subscribers. So I think journalism will become much more personal. News organization will stop serving mass audiences and will look for deeper connections to individuals who they serve and individual communities that they can offer something to. So in some ways, it's the decentralization of journalism from big mass market organizations to very niche, very community-focused operations.
And on the topic of journalism, I attended Kilkenomics last weekend, and one of the topics discussed at the event was the threat of artificial intelligence and its potential impact on journalism. Do you think that the role of the journalist could in some respects become extinct in the years to come?
No, never. I think ultimately what artificial intelligence, any form of automation can do is it can scale the amount of the processes of the old days that really were irrelevant. So in its best scenario, if you think about the old days, it was a very mechanical process to print a newspaper. It was a very labor-intensive process. And journalists at the end of the day were doing, human beings, a mass of the work. I think what automation and artificial intelligence can do is do a lot of the work of finding out who the right audience is, of allowing people to tailor and customize their news. But there's always going to be a role, and in fact, I think a more important role in the future, for the human being who makes that system work. And I think artificial intelligence, just like social media, has the capacity to do damage to traditional journalism. But it also, like social media, has the capacity to make journalism more democratic, to make it responsive to the needs of individuals and communities in a way that traditional journalism, for all its benefits, didn't have. In the old days when I was a TV anchorman on RTE, I told you the news and you couldn't answer back. You couldn't ask me questions or tell me what I should be reporting on. And I think a lot of the new technologies that are involved in artificial intelligence, which is really like a broad umbrella for a number of very interesting technologies, have the potential to allow each one of us as a citizen to get better sources of news and more relevant sources of news and discover things we didn't know. But having said all of that, in the hands of the wrong people, in the hands of big faceless corporations, artificial intelligence definitely has the capacity to do damage. So I would argue that it's not about the actual technology itself, it's the hands that it's in. And we need to work very hard to make sure that artificial intelligence and machine learning and all of those new systems are in the hands of ordinary people and working for their benefits. So there's a big job of work to be done to remove biases in artificial intelligence, and all that work will be done by human beings. So I believe that artificial intelligence can be used for human empowerment, but if we get it wrong and we don't pay attention to who owns it, then I think it has the capacity to create the kind of problems that social media clearly has had over the past 10 years.
And just on that topic, and finally, Mark, is fake news an actual concern or threat for the industry, or is it just a Trumpism?
So we have to separate two things. We should stop using the phrase fake news because that doesn't mean misinformation. What it means is it's for Trump and the people like him are using this as a way to attack the free press. So every time you use fake news, you're essentially buying into Trump's vision of the world. I would use the word misinformation. Misinformation is the systematic pollution of the world's information systems that's happening because there's profit incentives and because there's people out there who want to pull the wool over our eyes for political reasons. That's definitely a threat. But I do have to say that, I'm seeing a lot of news organizations with these great marketing campaigns about how they're fighting fake news. Like, in the end of the day, the worst problem is lack of trust. You can solve and fact check all the facts in the world, but if you have lost the trust of the people, that's the bigger problem. And so I would think that the media and news organizations in general need to work far harder on restoring trust by being connected to individuals than they do on promoting themselves as fighting back against misinformation.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was Mark Little, the co-founder of Kinzen, and I've no doubt that there are exciting times ahead for this business. We're almost at closing time here now at Business Matters, but before we go, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my production team, my guests for their contribution, and especially you as always for listening. Join me again next Saturday morning for more from the world of business, but until then, have a profitable week.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.